My 2-year-old, Carl, is at the stage where every bump or bruise, fall or scrape, invisible or visible, or even imaginary, is healed with one of three things: a Band-Aid, some ice, or a kiss. Boo-boo, boo-boo. It's a frequent word, and the familiar routine is comforting for both of us and pretty cute. He's learning that at the points of brokenness, there are people he can trust and things he can do that provide comfort. I don't know that much about intellectual development of 2-year-olds, but he also probably thinks that a kiss can actually heal, that a Band-Aid miraculously cures, and ice takes away pain. It's a gift to interact with him at this age, to be brought back into the realm of an enchanted world in which things really are that simple and sweet, where boo-boos have balms that are quick and readily available. But if we are fortunate, we grow beyond that developmental stage. Already at 5 years old, some wounds are too painful or embarrassing to be brought to a parent. Band-Aids are helpful and sometimes exciting, but not magical. And the reality of pain begins to shape our willingness to take risks, physical and emotional. And as adults, we see the complexity of brokenness. All kinds of parts of ourselves and the world that need healing. We have probably each, by the time we become adults, seen wounds that can never heal, wondered about brokenness that seems eternal, and felt for ourselves the way that the pain of injuries, physical, social, or emotional, and otherwise, have shaped our most intimate selves, as well as the world around us. Jesus, in this 4th chapter of Matthew's Gospel, picks up where John the Baptist left off, asking these fishermen to leave everything and follow him. To do what? Immediately thereafter, Jesus begins his public ministry. And how is that ministry described? Jesus went through all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and curing every disease and every sickness among the people. So his fame spread throughout all Syria, and they brought him all the sick, those who were afflicted with various diseases and pains, people possessed by demons or having epilepsy or afflicted with paralysis, and he cured them. And great crowds followed him from Galilee, the Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and from beyond the Jordan. After that description, we get two chapters of Jesus' teachings, the Sermon on the Mount, and then in Matthew's Gospels, more chapters that describe no fewer than 9 healings, 5 exorcisms, and 1 resurrection, not including his own. As modern people living in a disenchanted world, in which modern science and medicine is venerated, and we aren't sure what to do with miraculous healing, what do we make of all of this? I often wonder what we mean when we pray for healing, for individuals or for the world. And this sermon series that we are exploring is meant to probe that question from a number of angles. I promise you 0 answers. Today we wonder about these physical healings. We wonder what significance it has for our lives that Jesus started his public ministry curing every disease and healing every sickness among the people. Across the 1st century, imperial propaganda claimed that emperors Augustus and Domitian had initiated a golden age marked by abundant fertility, food, and health. But in reality, as New Testament scholar Warren Carter outlines, imperial structures were bad for the emotional and physical health of most of their subjects. Predictably, the imperial system benefited the tiny minority of elites, They fared well with access to plentiful resources that sustained their lifestyles of conspicuous consumption. And by contrast, non-elites, the vast majority, lived in pervasive poverty. For many, living conditions were atrocious, marked by squalor, garbage, human excrement, animals, disease, crime, fire risk, overcrowding, natural disasters, and unstable dwellings. And one of the serious consequences of the inadequate nutrition that resulted from these imperial structures was a context conducive for diseases of deficiency and contagion. The ancient physician Galen described a famine during which peasants in the countryside consumed many foods of poor quality and developed a huge variety of skin conditions, which I will not describe. Malnutrition and diseases of deficiency also render people more vulnerable to infectious diseases. So the diseases of Jesus' day were not just individual illnesses, but the symptoms of social dis-ease. In addition to the physical diseases, numerous studies have linked psychosomatic illness and demonic possession with imperial contexts. You may remember the studies of the impact of imperial power in French-dominated Algeria by Frantz Fanon, who described the physical impact of colonial power on frightened locals and noted that the prevalence of symptoms of pain, menstruation disorders, and muscular rigidity and paralysis were prevalent in that context. It's no wonder that Matthew's gospel, originating in this late first century imperial world, is peopled with sick and demon-possessed folks. These folks pervade the narrative just as they pervaded the ancient world. They embodied the diseases of deficiency and contagion, the high death rates and short lifespans that marked the imperial world, and still, relatively speaking, occupy the post-colonial world. They demonstrate the destructiveness of the system of power that was the empire's food supply, which privileged elites and deprived non-elites of access. So what did Jesus' healings accomplish then, given that context? If we take Matthew at his word that Jesus cured every disease and every sickness amongst the people, we are looking at something much greater than even the most talented miracle worker, who might have healed dozens or maybe even hundreds in their time. The sheer scale of Jesus' healings expose the lie of imperial propaganda. And they show us even today that the lies of empire that promise greatness and deliver inequality must be exposed. Caesar promised health, but Jesus delivered it. Jesus' transformative actions of healings and exorcisms repaired this imperial damage, as well as exposing and reversing its lethal impact. Matthew brings some additional context for us, too, recalling Isaiah's vision of a transformed world in which God's reign heals bodies and suggests that more is on display. Jesus' healings and exorcisms, like his declaration of the presence and future of God's reign, can be understood as part of the establishment of the kingdom of heaven. If disease disrupts the divinely desired social experience, Jesus' actions anticipate what God is yet to provide in full. Jesus uses his ability to deliver what empire had promised but failed to produce to demonstrate that God is more powerful than Caesar. His healings bring into being the presence of God's reign even in the midst of Rome's empire. He demonstrates that the kingdom of heaven is not just a spiritual realm, but one that is somatic, bodily, material, and societal. God will not only save, but God will enact restorative justice in which those who have been harmed will be healed. Those who have existed amidst scarcity will access abundance. Jesus heals, yes, and God has so much more in store. When he was a teenager, through sheer and confounding exhaustion, Carlos's heart was trying to tell him that a parasite had invaded his body. The microbe had invaded his immune system and was now multiplying inside his heart. By the time he was in his early 40s and living in Maryland, I should say this is not that Carlos. By the time he was in his early 40s and living in Maryland, he had to carry a small messenger bag in his hands that contained a device that pumped his left ventricle. His heart had reached end-stage heart failure. The doctor described the device as a bridge to a heart transplant. If the device failed, if the battery stopped, if Carlos didn't get to a hospital in time, he would die. And as a teenager in Central America, Carlos did not suspect the beetle-like insects that skittered out at night, dropping from crevices in the wall of his family home, to be the source of that parasite. Who ever heard of a chinche wanting your heart? The writer Daisy Hernandez asked. And that disease, Chagas disease, does come from a parasite that those bugs carry. It affects about 7 million people, most of them in Latin America. The parasite attacks the heart of 1 in 3 people who are infected. It eats away at the walls of their heart. It disrupts the electrical messages that determine the movements of the heart. In the US, about 300,000 people, most of those are migrants from Latin America, have the disease, along with a few dozen native-born Americans. The good news is this. The FDA approved a drug that can be used to treat Chagas disease in children and pregnant women. Medication is now much more widely available throughout Latin America than it was 2 decades ago. The disease is beginning to lessen its prevalence and intensity. Does this modern story of disease help us hear the Gospels in a new way? Might we be reminded that disease is still social, still societal in its inequality? We might hear the stories of Jesus' healings and wonder, why not me? Why not my illness or my loved ones? Perhaps we also respond in gratitude, thanking God for a miraculous healing that we have witnessed. The healing in Matthew's gospel is not just the physical healing of 9, 14, a dozen, or even hundreds of individuals. Yes, Jesus was a miracle worker. Yes, God is capable of miracles. And those miracles are for each of us and for all of us. But healing in the gospel is not an end in and of itself, but a way of pointing to the kingdom of heaven. As if each healing is saying, if you thought that was amazing, how much more would be possible if you would follow me? If you rejoice in saving one person, how much more will you rejoice if you join me as a co-worker for the kingdom of heaven, in which we might be able to save everyone? If you rejoice in the miracle of modern medicine, how much more will we rejoice if it is distributed equitably? If we celebrate the abundance of creation and healthy food that we enjoy, how much more gratitude will we feel when all are fed? If we pray for the healing of one, how much more will we know God's presence when we work for the healing of all? To truly understand Jesus' power as a healer, we must see that it is so much bigger than one person or a few people. It is bigger than our wildest dreams. May each act of healing bring us one step closer to a world in which all people are offered salvation. May we regain the ability to look at wounds of all kinds with the enchanted eyes of a toddler, knowing that we are there to comfort one another and to work with and through God for for healing that is beyond our wildest dreams. May it be so.